Hi guys, this is Robin with Weight Loss Apocalypse, and today I want to talk about body image, which is the topic I've been covering this last month, because this is what my book, Thin Supremacy, Our Cultural Battle with Weight, is about. So I want to cover what's essentially in the second section of Thin Supremacy. If you haven't read it, there is a link below. You can upload it from my website. You can get it on Amazon. You can also order the softcover book, which is available now. So in this second section of Thin Supremacy, I talk about where did this idea of worshiping thinness and the ideal around the lean body come from. And much of this information I actually got, let me pull this book up. So if you wanted to look this up, I wrote about this in this chapter. This is chapter 3, section 2, in a book written by Louise Foxcroft. And she wrote the book Calories and Corsets, The History of Dieting Over 2,000 Years. So fascinating content that she put in there. So I think it's important that she get credit. So I used a lot of her information. So at different times in history, clearly body image is a very important aspect of how we communicate our own personal expression of ourselves, but it's also an expression of our culture. I go into body image as a survival mechanism in the first section of Thin Supremacy, but I also have some recorded videos, so you can refer back to those. So ultimately, typically body image is an image that is seen positively in your mind around what is inclusive in your culture, what is seen positively in the tribe, family, friend group you want to be included by. And it's changed over the course of thousands of years, like corsets. The last video I did, I gave some examples: foot binding in different cultures, forehead binding, obviously wigs and makeup and different ways to communicate your class. Typically, it's a way to communicate your wealth, class system, health, all of that. So prior to the 1900s, in the 1800s, body fat was seen as healthy. It was viewed as wealthy, healthy, and was seen as a way to survive famine and viruses and disease. And it was seen as something that was physically healthy, partly because there weren't a lot of people who had more body fat because most people were poor, living off the land. So it took a lot of affluence, people who were higher in stature, men who wanted to be seen as, more rich, wanted to have more body fat on their bodies, and women were also seen more sexually attractive with body fat because most people didn't have access to food, and also there was more prevalence of disease and viruses, and they didn't have immunizations. And so if you were to get ill, your likelihood of dying was much higher. If you didn't have access to food, you didn't have had access to nutritional diversity, you didn't have access to health care. So you can imagine when you, in that, living at that time, that seeing someone with more body fat, it isn't just the symbol of wealth, but health. And when someone was seen who was leaner or thinner, imagine that person's emotional well-being. They probably were poor, more sickness, and experienced more death in their life. So you can imagine they probably had more mental health issues as you got thinner and thinner. So it would be understandable to see that at that period of time, in most of the periods of time in history where body fat was seen as a positive, healthy thing, you can understand why thinness and leanness would be stigmatized as something of dirty, diseased, mentally ill, poor, and something that people didn't want. In fact, parents would provide their daughters more food in hopes that they would plump up to be more meritable, and hoping that they could find a partner in marriage that had more wealth. It's really fascinating. So what happened at the turn of the century is first of all, one very significant thing that occurred was the immunizations. And so diseases were less prevalent because of the access to health care. The other thing that happened was the invention of trolleys, the invention of carts and not carts, trolleys and trains, and the ability for people to get through distance became more accessible. So in general, people's activity started to go down. At the same time, there was more food being produced because of trains being able to take wheat across the country, and the mass production of food became more available to people who were poor, which is awesome. So, but what happened is the elite narcissistic culture of we need to be superior didn't like that normal average people were starting to get bigger. Again, put yourself in that position where you're poor, you're in this culture that sees leanness as a sign of illness and disease. How, if you were in that, you would want to have body fat. You would be thinking, oh, they're so beautiful. I want to be like that. I want to be included with that body image of biggerness. And so if you're it, and the elite who were bigger, if they couldn't stand out, what happened is the body images started to shift. There's more and more people with body fat. By the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, people started studying body fat, but the attitudes had changed, especially in the elite early on. So there are some quotes that I put here from one of the doctors who said, if fat is not an insidious, creeping enemy, I don't know what is. Their attitude started making fun of people who had body fat. Again, it's the haves versus the have-nots. And when those elite narcissistic, oh, we're better than you, they started to not like the fact that normal people could blend in with them. They changed the body image up to be leaner is better. And so in the 1920s, there was this idea of leanness and thinness that started to shift social perceptions of this idea that body fat was superior. Anyways, it's really fascinating. So by the 1920s, they were selling tapeworms, different types of amphetamines, diuretics, laxatives, weight loss chemicals, the vibrating juggle machine before then. So then World War II came about. And after World War II, this idea of life insurance occurred. And to get people to buy into life insurance, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company hired a statistician, not a physician, not a scientist, not someone who understands physiology, but a statistician who looks at numbers and creates associations. They hired a statistician to create something simple that would associate some type of body measurement to risk of disease. Again, this is for life insurance. This is not for anything medical. So this statistician created the height and weight chart. It was in 1942, came out in 1943. This one actually is from 1959. So this is the new desirable weight and height charts for men and women. Really interesting, because based on this, I'm considered overweight. Okay, So prior to that, there was no divisive line around who's overweight and who's underweight, and this idea between risk of disease with weight. And this chart changed everything. This changed everything. Because again, this idea that we can see your disease became something written and tangible. It wasn't just an assumption or a stigma of disease. Now we can look at someone and make the assumption that they are diseased. So it really became, fat became stigmatized. It's like they just added gasoline to the fire. And so I wanted to show you these. Now, safely lose your ugly fat. Reduce fat spots, your arm, chin, hips, bust, so you can see body images and the imagery they're using. If you are overweight, the mere thought of appearing at a beach must be embarrassing. So they're starting to shame this idea about having body fat. These are all, I have a bunch of these in the book, Thin Supremacy, if you want to see them. And again, the idea that it was unhealthy. So you can imagine, you know, household to household. Oh my God. I went and got my height and weight chart done and I'm healthy. So this conversation around what's your height and weight, where do you fit on the height and weight chart? Are you unhealthy versus unhealthy? Again, there's no, someone prior to that might have been totally happy, totally unaware, very comfortable with their body. And because they went and got this basic height and weight chart assessment, all of a sudden they're in conflict with their body. Their body is now a risk of disease. So this whole new industry was born at this point, the diet and weight loss industry. Here's one, Jaja Gabor. Excess weight may ruin your health and your looks. So the idea around the way a person looked and their health and well-being and their disease became disgusting, and thinness became something that was desirable. Don't be fat. So this is all after the height and weight chart. Here's one, the 10-day miracle. I find this one interesting because if you read the fine print, this has some fine print. Here is a pleasurable, sensible, scientific way to reduce. So there, a lot of these talk about how doctors approve this, so it's supposed to be healthy, to see those unattractive bulges smooth out and disappear like magic. It's so amazing. Anyways, these are in my book, Thin Supremacy. You can check those out. So, oh, there's so much more. That whole section is amazing. The height and weight chart really changed a lot of things. And and it evolved as well because there was this huge industry that was born out of it that made a ton of money demonizing body fat and glamorizing leanness. And you can imagine over the course of the decades, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the 2000s, how these images have evolved from that point. So, okay, you guys, if you want more information, you're going to have to read Thin Supremacy, Body Image, and Our Cultural Battle with Weight. I'm the author, Robin Woodall. If you like this video, thumbs up, please share it, especially for those of you who are helping others. This is great content for you to share. So, okay, we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.